Welcome to The Explainer. I'm so glad you're joining us today because we're about to unpack one of the most phenomenal, mind-blowing business journeys in modern history. We're going to break down exactly how Jeff Bezos built Amazon, taking it from a fragile, tiny startup all the way to one of the world's most dominant and recognizable companies. We'll dive right into the core strategies, the massive risks, and the specific leadership philosophies that actually made the whole shebang possible. Now, what if I told you that one of the world's most valuable companies started inside a cramped garage with just a handful of books? I mean, it literally sounds like a Hollywood movie script, doesn't it? But that's the actual reality of what we're looking at today. The founder walked away from a highly coveted, super high-paying Wall Street job to chase an idea that pretty much everyone around him thought was destined to fail. And that risky, fragile little idea, yeah, that became Amazon.
Section 1. The Founder's Early Spark. The Founder's Journey.
Okay, let's dive into this by tracing things right back to the beginning. Even as a kid, Jeff Bezos was endlessly curious. There's this famous story of him actually dismantling his own crib with a screwdriver just to see how it worked. And that insatiable curiosity eventually led him to Princeton University, where he studied computer science and electrical engineering, really immersing himself in those early, Wild West days of computing. But here's the thing. After graduating, he didn't immediately launch a startup. Instead, he took that analytical mind straight to Wall Street, quickly climbing the ranks at a prominent investment firm. By all traditional measures, he'd made it. He had financial security, prestige, and a totally clear, comfortable path forward. And that brings us to the ultimate crossroads. On one hand, you've got this secure, incredibly lucrative Wall Street career. On the other, a massively risky startup idea. So you have to ask yourself, why would anyone leave that kind of safety for a completely unproven venture? Well, Bezos used something he called the regret minimization framework. Basically, he projected himself forward to 80 years old, looking back on his life, and he realized something crucial. He wouldn't regret trying and failing to build an internet company, but he would absolutely, for sure, regret not trying at all. That is such a profound entrepreneurial takeaway. Sometimes the absolute biggest risk you can take is not taking one at all.
Section 2. Discovering the Internet Boom. Discovering growth.
So, the catalyst for this massive leap of faith all came down to a single, mind-bending statistic. In the early 1990s, while he was researching investment opportunities, Bezos discovered that internet usage was growing at a staggering rate of 2,300% a year. I mean, wow, things just do not grow that fast outside of a petri dish. This explosive growth was his ultimate call to adventure. He saw that this massive global infrastructure was being built, and whoever figured out how to sell things on it first, they were going to win incredibly big. And this perfectly highlights the total genius of his early business strategy. Out of all the things you could possibly sell online, why choose books as the very first product? Well, books were absolutely perfect. They're super easy to pack, they're hard to break during shipping, and most importantly, there are millions of different titles in print. Think about it. No physical bookstore, no matter how gigantic it is, could ever stock every single book. But a digital bookstore? It totally could. It was literally the perfect product to prove the ultimate advantage of the internet: unlimited selection.
Section 3. The Garage Startup. Humble Beginnings.
Now, let's be clear, it was not glamorous. Not at all. In 1994, Bezos and his then-wife Mackenzie drove all the way across the country to Seattle, a spot they specifically chose because it was close to both tech talent and major book distributors. They rented a house, and the company was literally born right there in the garage. To save cash, they famously built their very first desks out of cheap wooden doors they bought at a hardware store. It's such a stark, powerful visual, right? It totally reminds us that even the most massive scale and dominance always start with humble, really frugal beginnings. Now, what's really interesting here is the name itself, Amazon. Bezos didn't just pull it out of a hat. Get this. Initially, he wanted to call the company Cadabra, like abracadabra. But a lawyer actually misheard it over the phone as cadaver. Yeah. Realizing that was absolutely terrible branding, he opened up a dictionary. He eventually settled on Amazon for two very strategic reasons. First, back in those days, website directories were organized alphabetically, so having an A name meant you showed up first on the list. Smart, right? Second, the Amazon is the largest river in the world by a massive margin, and Bezos envisioned his store being the biggest in the world. So that vision of immense scale was literally baked into the name from day one. But, of course, having a clever name didn't make actually running the thing any easier. The early hurdles were just immense. Servers crashed constantly.
Bezos and his tiny, exhausted team would literally be down on their hands and knees, packing boxes on the floor until the early hours of the morning. And then you have the financial challenges. Just to keep the lights on, Bezos had to take dozens and dozens of meetings with super skeptical angel investors. He was trying to convince them to part with $50,000 for a bookstore that didn't even physically exist. Unsurprisingly, a lot of them said no. The big leadership lesson here is all about unyielding resilience, believing in the data when literally everyone else doubts you.
But then, all that gritty hard work actually began to pay off. The first customer orders finally started to arrive. In those early days, they actually programmed a bell to ring in the office every single time someone made a purchase. And soon enough, that bell was ringing so constantly, they just had to turn it off entirely. Within just the first month of launching their website in 1995, they had sold books to people in all 50 states and 45 different countries. That crazy, risky idea wasn't just a theory anymore. The financial impact was real, and it was actually working.
Section 4. Customer obsession and rapid growth.
So the crucial point, the real turning point for them, was this concept of customer obsession. See, most companies focus incredibly heavily on their competitors, right? They're always trying to figure out how to beat the guy across the street. But Bezos completely inverted that model. He insisted on an absolute, unwavering dedication to customer satisfaction above all else. He even famously kept a literal empty chair in their meeting rooms to represent the customer, forcing all his executives to actively consider how every single decision would impact the buyer. This strategy built unparalleled trust, turning first-time buyers into fiercely, fiercely loyal advocates. And that deep well of customer trust? It created incredible momentum. But as you might have guessed, selling books was only the beginning. The massive infrastructure they had built to ship books could technically be used to ship absolutely anything. Section 5. Going public and expanding. Massive expansion. To actually fund this massive dream of shipping anything, Amazon needed serious capital. So in 1997, they held their initial public offering, or IPO. Going public meant officially opening the company up to stock market investors. It was a huge financial milestone that flooded the company with the kind of cash necessary to build gigantic distribution centers and heavily upgrade their tech. But being a public company also meant a new headache. They now had to answer to Wall Street analysts who were constantly demanding quarterly profits. Armed with all this new capital, they executed a massive pivot. The next decision changed the future of e-commerce forever. They transitioned from being the world's biggest bookstore to being the everything store. They expanded into CDs, DVDs, electronics, toys, and eventually, literally everything. The marketing strategy was beautifully simple: be the ultimate one-stop shop for human consumption. I mean, why go to 5 different websites or drive to 5 different physical stores when Amazon has it all? It's cheaper, and they can ship it directly to your front door. But you might be wondering, how on earth did they afford this massive, rapid expansion? It all comes down to this core principle: long-term thinking. While Wall Street was practically screaming at Amazon to show short-term profits, Bezos aggressively reinvested every single dollar right back into the company to capture more market share. He was completely willing to bleed money for years if it ensured future dominance. He literally trained his investors to understand that true value creation takes time. It was a radical leadership philosophy, but it's exactly what allowed Amazon to survive the brutal dot-com crash when thousands of other internet startups just went completely bankrupt. Section 6. The unfinished story. Beyond e-commerce. But the story doesn't end there. Not even close, because what Bezos built next surprised the entire business world. By the early 2000s, everyone thought they totally understood what Amazon was, just a really massive online retailer. But inside the company, the leadership team realized something incredible. They had become so incredibly good at running massive computer servers just to keep their own website afloat that they could actually package all that computing power and run it out to other companies. And that leaves us with a monumental question to ponder today. What happens when a massive bookstore leverages its global e-commerce infrastructure to pioneer modern cloud computing? That pivot completely redefined what a technology company could even be, eventually powering everything from Netflix to top-tier national security databases. It is absolutely wild. But as for how they actually pulled off that transition, well, that's a story for another time. All right, let's jump right back into this explainer. Now, if you remember from our last deep dive, Jeff Bezos had just proved to the world that selling books on the internet wasn't some passing fad. Actually, it was a highly scalable machine. But, books,
They were literally just the prologue. The construction of a true global empire was just getting started. But before we map out all these incredible leaps, we really have to ask ourselves a pretty fundamental question. Could an empire of this magnitude ever be replicated today? Are the days of building a trillion-dollar ecosystem out of a literal garage completely over? Well, to figure that out, let's look at the exact blueprint that separated Amazon from countless other dot-com casualties. So here is the flywheel of their success we're going to cover today. 1. The expansion and the ecosystem. 2. AWS and the tech revolution. 3. The customer obsession philosophy. 4. 10 lessons for entrepreneurs. And finally, 5. The biggest future risks. Okay, diving into Section 1, the expansion and the ecosystem. So, Amazon moved with absolute brutal speed, branching out from books into seemingly totally unrelated categories, like electronics and fashion. But here's the real masterstroke: locking in loyalty. When they launched Amazon Prime, it fundamentally changed our consumer psychology. I mean, it turned 2-day shipping into a baseline expectation for all of us, right? And then, by opening up the Amazon Marketplace, they weren't just operating a store anymore. They essentially created an entire economy. And they cemented that whole shebang with massive acquisitions down the line, like Whole Foods and MGM. Now, obviously, every single one of these new ventures required an absolute elite logistics network. You simply cannot promise 2-day shipping without massive global infrastructure. And this is what created their famous flywheel effect. Expanding warehouses speeds up delivery. Faster delivery increases order volume. Higher volume lowers prices, which naturally attracts even more customers. It just speeds itself. Taking it down to a more micro level, the launch of the Kindle totally revolutionized digital reading. But think about the sheer brilliance here for a second. At the time, Amazon was the biggest seller of physical books in the world. And yet, they aggressively disrupted themselves. They knew for a fact that if they didn't cannibalize their own legacy business, a competitor was absolutely going to do it for them. Moving on to Section 2, AWS and the tech revolution. Behind the scenes, all this insane, rapid growth was actually crashing Amazon's internal servers. So to fix this massive headache, their engineers built a highly flexible cloud computing system. Eventually, they had this light bulb moment. Hey, we can rent this excess capacity out to other businesses. They called it AWS, or Amazon Web Services. And incredibly, this internal IT fix unexpectedly became the company's absolute #1 profit engine. It generated the billions that quietly subsidized the razor-thin margins of their retail operations for years. Today, AWS basically powers the entirety of Amazon. Because they have this incredible high-margin tech pillar, they've been able to generate the massive capital needed to fund huge leaps into artificial intelligence, machine learning, and getting smart devices, like Alexa, into millions of living rooms worldwide. Which brings us to Section 3, the customer obsession philosophy. You see, Jeff Bezos hardwired this concept of customer obsession straight into the company's DNA. What this means in practice is starting with the customer's exact needs and then working completely backwards to build the product. So while all their competitors were desperately obsessing over each other's market share, Amazon was exclusively, relentlessly obsessing over how to make the customer's life totally friction-free. Think about traditional businesses for a second. They, and especially Wall Street, usually chase quick profits. They're always reacting to the latest quarterly earnings. But Amazon, they actively ignored all of that. They embraced extreme long-term thinking and patience. They willingly accepted massive short-term financial losses, sometimes for years on end, just to build an insurmountable infrastructure moat. And that same exact philosophy was passed right over to Andy Jassy, who, by the way, was the original architect behind AWS when he took over as CEO. His whole era is defined by maintaining that relentless customer obsession, all while steering a highly scrutinized megacorporation into a future that's going to be dominated by AI and robotics. Okay, Section 4, 10 lessons for entrepreneurs. So let's distill all of this into a practical blueprint for building a resilient ecosystem. Number 1, obsess over your customers, not your competitors. 2, think in decades, not just quarters. 3, innovate relentlessly. 4, build a self-feeding flywheel. 5, figure out how to turn your internal infrastructure into a monetized product. 6, empower third parties to build on your platform. 7, master logistics for unbeatable speed. 8, disrupt your own products before your rivals get the chance to. 9, practice extreme patience. And 10, earn your customers' trust every single day. Let's look at the final section, number 5, the biggest future risks.
Because look, even an empire this massive has some pretty immediate vulnerabilities. On the tech side, they're facing fierce cloud and AI competition from other well-funded giants. Operationally, they're grappling with intense labor challenges and the absolutely skyrocketing costs of global logistics. And zooming out to a macro level, they're staring down tremendous government antitrust pressure, not to mention the massive sustainability and environmental demands of running their global shipping network. To survive all these risks, Amazon absolutely has to win in three critical tech battlegrounds. They have to maintain their cloud dominance, sure, but more importantly, they have to double down on artificial intelligence and advanced robotics. For Amazon, automation isn't just some flashy corporate buzzword, it's a literal mathematical necessity if they want to offset rising costs and keep that flywheel spinning. The entire Amazon formula is surprisingly simple to understand, yet it's incredibly difficult to execute. It leaves us with this defining takeaway. Amazon didn't become one of the world's greatest companies by chasing quick profits. It became great by earning customer trust, investing for the future, and never stopping innovation. So, as Amazon continues its massive transition from a simple online retailer into what is essentially a foundational utility for modern life, it leaves us with a really provocative question. Is the biggest threat to Amazon a new startup coming along and building a better flywheel? Or is it the sheer gravity of operating at a scale that risks collapsing under its own weight? Let us know what you think down in the comments. And if this explainer changed how you view the Amazon empire, make sure to hit like and subscribe for more deep dives. See you next time.